Tonight, we're going to have a discussion about Indonesia in crisis. And the question is, what kind of crisis? I think it's a crisis of many different dimensions, but primarily a crisis about the legitimacy of the government. We've had 2 weeks of serious protests, violence, and now with the most recent issue of Tempo, allegations that there was some involvement of people with current or past links to the TNI, the Indonesian military. Our speakers and discussants are going to address, I think they are anyway, 5 different questions. First is, how should we interpret what happened? Was this primarily an explosion of economic grievances against elite privilege? And as such, what are its antecedents? Ed can talk about that. And will it continue? Was it part of a cycle of protest and repression that is linked to the steady decline in Indonesian democracy? And will this only get worse? Was it directed against Prabowo, against the government, against the economy in general, or all of the above? And, or we could say, or in the most optimistic interpretation, does it signal an important break in the political complacency of the Indonesian public, and perhaps a sign that from the bottom up, reformasi can get back on track? Second question is, who benefits? Is there anyone in the Indonesian elite who gains from the violence or the specter of instability? And how do intra-elite divisions play into this, particularly police versus military, Jokowi versus Prabowo, and so on? Third, what are the immediate and longer-term consequences of this? The protesters want a change in the DPR. They want police reform, legal reform, more government accountability, academic freedom, more protections of civil liberties. How do these protests get us closer to those goals? Fourth, what didn't happen that we might have expected? One welcome thing that didn't happen was anything linked to race, ethnicity, or religion. And I think it's important to understand how important it is that so far that hasn't happened. And finally, and perhaps most important, what has to happen for the disparate groups involved in what's effectively a leaderless protest to turn themselves into a social movement with clear and achievable goals? And how do you keep the momentum up without other parties moving to exploit it?
So the problem, I think, and this is the one I think one of the issues we need to wrestle with in this webinar, is that it's just very difficult to break out of one of these sorts of collective action, informal politics traps of the kind that we've seen Indonesian democracy develop into. The problem is not so much that of course, there are particular formal laws, regulations, political structures, patterns of behavior that the protesters oppose, and many of them are embodied in this list of 17 plus 8 demands that have been sort of formalized over the last few days. But above all, what they're opposed to are these informal networks and patterns of power that infuse all of the major political institutions at this time. And I guess that's the big difference that I see, that the goals of the anti-Suharto movement were so concrete, so focused on overthrowing Suharto, that it's much harder, in fact, to formulate an equivalently effective set of goals this time around. The external jolt of the protests, I'm sure, will have some sort of a role in bringing back to the political agenda some of these issues to do with political reform, fighting corruption, and so on. But I think the biggest problem that these progressive or protest movements have faced in Indonesia during the reformasi period is still their relative inability to make a breakthrough themselves in the electoral arena. The fact that elections themselves are so dominated by these patterns of money politics and clientelism and programmatic politics of any kind, let alone the sort of progressive politics we see emerging out of protest movements in countries like Thailand, for example, have yet to find a really secure place in Indonesia's electoral arena. And I think that's the sort of the big challenge that this movement will face going forward. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
This crisis basis and belief that Indonesia is currently in a state of national leadership vacuum, which is incompetence leader. The following facts are indisputable. The first is the police force is paralyzed and no longer capable of performing its basic function of maintaining order and security. The second, the president has allowed looting, destruction, and burning of police station and legislative buildings in Paris regions. The third is the president and the vice president have failed to show leadership. In the midst of this crisis, both of them have been absent from a public sphere and have not provided any real direction to the people, exclude police and military to repression. Other leaders such as those of in-house representative, the People's Consultative Assembly and Regional Representative Council, also silent, very slow to respond, and with no one properly addressing the demands of the people voiced through demonstration. The question is why? In our opinion, this is an accumulation of many previous problems. The first is also we know continuing of legacy of a severely low system and circumstance from the Jokowi administration. But the Prabowo also administration has a major problem with legitimacy. Yes, with a history of human rights violation in kidnapping cases, a vice president who is facing charge of ethical violation by constitutional court judge who changed regulation to get Gibran elected, and strong finding of bias and the mobilization of state apparatus in the election. In 10 months of Prabowo office, we see the problem is the placement of mobilization of military in numerous public position, state under enterprise, overseeing development project, including food asset project, free meals for student projects, many ways military present. And the second is the bloated and chaotic cabinet transition has caused many problems, not only in the budget, but also in coordination and programs, including many cases of dual position that violate the constitutional court's ruling. Also, the ambitious project that require massive budget reallocation and deplete fund from the other basic needs. As a result of this reallocation, the budget allocated to local government has dropped drastically. Even though local government heavily rely on fund from the central government. And the open chaos of government failures that anger the people continue to occur in succession. And Prabowo stumbled to resolve them. For example, the increase of VAT, gas shortcut for the people, the blocking of tens million of bank accounts, the granting of amnesty to convince the corruptor, drastic increase in the land and building tax in many regions, and also the including attempts to bury and whitewash past human rights violation in the first day, from the first day. So during the crisis in August, we saw how the president, the chief of police, and the speaker of DPR misunderstood the problem and acted brutal towards citizens. As in 5 September, YLBJ and LBH offices recorded at least 3,337 people arrested, 1,042 people injured and rushed to the hospital, and to the death, dozens of people have been named as a suspect, including activists who have been critical but arrested for incitement and provocation. Contrast also reported that there are people who are still missing to this day, 2 until 7, and Sept also reported that serious violation of the right to information have been committed. Internet shutdown, the shutdown of live social media services, even doxing and digital intimidation of democracy activists. It's happened to me. my number blasting to the people through WhatsApp media, and the people thinking my number is Eco Patrio number. So I received hundreds of message from the people. They are angry with me. Until now, still happen. And YLBhi and civil society movement tried to take action since the maybe second day, and respond quickly by providing assistance to the victim and violence and arrest. And the last is there were many oddities in this riot, and allegation of military involvement in the riots began to be raised by our investigation, also by the media. Thank you, Sydney.
I think the core of the problem is corruption, and also inequality that getting spread and widening. So I think the president knows that also the problem, but the fact is he keep continue making a policy, issuing policy that has nothing to do with that two problem, inequality and corruption. That's, for me, is a question why, right? Why he keep going, and why he become ignorant from whatever civil society organizations or public citizens demand. So far, 10 months since he was inaugurated, nothing really like strong gesture or strong policy showing that he wants to deal with that two main issues. And personally, I'm grateful that we are basically returned to this new order episode 2 in terms of, as you mentioned in the when you opening the discussion, who benefit from, not from the riot, no, sorry, not from the demonstration, but from the policy so far. The free lunch program, the cooperative red and white, that's all, using these infrastructures of the military. So that's really become a questions why is he actually planning to that direction or this regime, right? And that's explained to me why he's never say even sorry that Mas Isnur had mentioned. It seems he doesn't think it is really he doesn't think it's really a problem, because looking from the way he responds to it. Also, he keep changing the policy. At once he visiting Affan Kurniawan, the late Affan Kurniawan, to his house, pay his condolence. But at the same time, he said that let's promote police who are being beaten on the street. So that's really kind of worry me, and maybe we can discuss that more. But also at the same time, we can really the political or the international atmosphere is really changing too. That's really different from 1998. The type of populism and anti-democratic, and the US also shows an example, right? That's really kind of common everywhere. So something happened with Mas Isnur, for instance. It's really difficult to really mobilize the international support. Well, it's still there, but it's getting shrinking. We also witnessed at the same time this situation, the constraining situation from the international perspective as well. And that's also really another worry because the trend of donors going declining globally and on the human rights as well. And that's really become a kind of constraint for keep pushing the democratic agenda. And my last point is that from the civil society itself, I can see at this right that the demand is very much not really focused on targeted one like we have in 1998, corruption, KKN or corruption and the throw of Suharto, right? Now we have so many things because so many layers of a problem, and that can really confusing for the public and for the civil society demand as well. But we also see this change of generations, right? From my generation or Mas Isnur generation to younger generation, and that sociologically speaking, it's changing. They also use different type of strategies. So we don't know anything about influencer at that time, but they are the one who are now play important role in mobilizing support or mobilize awareness from the citizens, from the just ordinary citizen, that every day they experience this inequality. Every day they need to move away from the main street just for the elite to pass through with the with this type of special vehicle. That's the type of that grievances that become really consolidated, and I think that's younger generation kind of actually we can support each other and become a more massive movement. I guess what we can also identify from this movement is, as I mentioned, the everydayness, Mbak Vero. So like the color, it's now being popular, the green and the pink. That's also basically expression or color of the oppressed or color of this marginal group. First, the green one is the ojol jacket, and the second is the pink one is the mother or women very brave facing this police barricade. So in a way, the symbol shows its inequality, right? And that's mostly experienced by these people in the urban area. That's really every day, traffic jam, limitation of public transport. That I'm saying that the other group in the provincial town or the rural, that not, but it's a different type of grievances. It's different types. So it's really kind of day that you can kind of face every day, like this long traffic jam at TB Simatupang. You just try to be, sane. And that's really kind of this kind of urban bias type of problem that is being addressed. And then, the ojol is a representation for these urban activities where it's basically killed. And everybody who rely on this transportation or rely on this service feels really heartbroken. Everybody was just crying looking at this very short footage. So I guess what I can respond. Thank you.
Exploration spreading in recent time is not an anomaly. It is the logical consequences of policies that look empirical on paper, yet neglect aspirations, justice, and participations. When public protest is met with silencing, including on campuses, that is not mere mismanagement. It is an early indicator of a state on the path to failure. In many places, national strategic projects are executed under a logical acceleration, deadlines, output, and numbers, while sidelining affected communities. The Rempang case in Riau Islands lays this pattern bare. Residents' protests were answered with force, tear gas, and arrests. The trauma even reached into schools. Development premise on coercion corrodes the two most vital assets of the states, trust and legitimacy. Once trust collapses, every subsequent policy, even the good ones, will be read as a threat, not a solution. And since the omnibus law was passed, waves of implementing regulation has tended to ease the expansion of concessions, the release of forest areas and extractive practices, while agrarian conflict are left to smolder. In many locales, from Wadas in Purworejo Regency to customary village around mining sites, people feel their right to a livelihood is being negotiated without them. This is when law moves faster than justice. Legal instruments pave the way for projects but fail to erect adequate social and environmental safeguard. The accumulation of such injustice become fuel waiting to ignite. The expansion of the military rules through the reserves component or Comchat and the placement of active or retired officer in strategic civilian posts shift the boundaries of democracy built after reformasi. More worrying, still critique of this expansion rule is often met with intimidations. An opinion writer was sideswiped by unknown assailants on a motorcycle. Student challenging policies were visited by territorial officers for data collections. It is not only action that shift public public reasoning Sept as well, this agreement is treated as a threat rather than a vitamin for policy. This rekindles the shadow of the dual function doctrine we call dwifungsi as a new gas. Advocacy data show a surge in arbitrary arrests of demonstrators and activists in recent years. Online verbal catch-all provisions we call in bahasa pasal karet, especially the ITE law, has become multi-purpose nets for targeting critics. On campuses, discussions are disbanded, student media shuttered, and outspoken lecturer and researchers intimidated. This is not a peripheral issue. Academic freedom is a barometer of the health of a rule of law state. When it is obstructs a nation's capacity for self-correction goes numb. At this point, we are no longer talking about procedural defects. We are confronting a systematic listening deficit. When channel of deliberation jam, grievance accumulate, a small spark, say, talk of levies allowance for official amidst the rising cost of living is enough to ignite social fury. Tragedies in the streets, including the death of an online motorcycle taxi, or we call ojek online driver during a protest, accelerate acceleration into widespread unrest. Casualties among thousands are arrested and the spinal of resentment deepens. The August-September 2025 explosion was not spontaneity. It was the cause of a long-ignored accumulation of injustice. A state
Thank you.
that refused to listen was ultimately forced to listen by turmoil. A state function not only by its capacity to cause, but its capacity to listen, to mediate conflict, protect right, and recognize the dignity of its citizens. When peaceful protest is criminalized, academic critique is feared, and community objections to project are dismissed as disruption. The state fails at its most basic function. Ensuring policy is grounded in informed consent and respect for right. Put differently,
Basically, one of the audience members wants to know if there really is a crisis that's going to last, or is everything going to go back to normal as it was before? And if the momentum is already being lost before any of the demands from the protesters are accommodated, what's the solution? What do you do?
I feel that we're in a moment or a period now of Indonesia where we might be in a sort of a phase of recurrent crisis, actually, that we've seen this now over the last few years. And I think it's partly to do with some of the sort of the economic shifts which came in the post-COVID world, the shift to mass-scale casualization of even previously formal workforce, the sort of, some of the other, the economic difficulties that are occurring for some of the sort of social sectors that Linda and others have been talking around. Plus, on top of that, this sort of deep, entrenchment of this politics of patronage and so on within the political class that we've already seen over the last 5-6 years, that we're in this period of sort of recurrent waves of crisis that don't really ever seem to be fully resolved, that there's some sort of minor concessions, and we've seen this time around, but there's neither the sufficient sort of push from below or the capacity within the political elite to produce the sort of systemic changes that we could see a clear resolution. So I think my gut feeling is we are in for a period of sort of disorientation as Indonesia sort of searches for some sort of a new sort of a format and a new set of political forces that can seek a way out of what Doreen called this sort of impasse we're in at the moment.
Why haven't we seen more involvement of indigenous peoples or West Papuans or other marginalized communities in these protests? Is it because it's a more class-based movement? Is it because it's a more urban movement? Is it because it's easier to mobilize these people? Why have certain groups been excluded? Maybe you can take that, Veronica.
Thank you for the question. I think it's the question of like press coverage. I think most of the press coverage focus on Jakarta, but if you see the geography of the protest itself, themselves, they spread all over the country, especially even in places like Borneo, which was or Kalimantan, that is not famous for protests. But in the case of West Papua, I think I can say certainly that in Sorong, there has been also protests against the police brutality and the transfer of prisoners, Papuan prisoners to outside island. But nothing to do with the DPR, with the DPR protest. I think we have to see the need to include everyone. Maybe is not always a correct way to understand what's going on the ground. But I think it's very clear in the urban area, in places like Java and like Sumatra, like for instance North Sumatra, there's been a resentment against the system, not only the government system, but also tax, for instance, in some rural areas in Central Java. So tax-based protests also apparent here. I think if you think about the Chinese, I think the question about the Chinese is very interesting because we see less sentiment against the Chinese, and I think that's precisely because there is this new class formation, especially with the emergence of this precariat class, the motorbike driver or ojek, that have become an important force in the protest, just because it's not really clear that the Chinese control that platform, for instance, or control the tax, for instance, the increase of the tax. They see people like Sri Mulyani and all the DPR members on social media. And I think it is very wrong to assume that rural people, indigenous people, are not involved in the protest because they have been protesting against PSN or what's called the National Proyek Strategis Nasional. So the Proyek Strategis Nasional spread in at least 10 areas in Indonesia, and for instance in Merauke, in West Papua, there have been a lot of protests against Prabowo. And Prabowo gave the medal to Haji Isan. So it's really, the elite attitude really represent this, the building of a system that's corrupt, that's nepotist, that doesn't care about the ordinary people. So I think it's really wrong if you just pay attention to the urban areas, but don't see a lot of protests in places like North Sumatra, rural areas in North Sumatra, or in West Papua. Even though West Papua is a kind of colony, so it has different type of protest, different aspiration than their counterpart, for instance, in Sulawesi.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the real answer. We have conflicts and protests all over Indonesia. The fact that they didn't take part in this particular one is not an indication of satisfaction in any way with the current status quo. And of course, in Papua, it's a completely different set of issues.
I think in a large part, and if I can kind of bridge this back to our discussion on what can foreigners do, people on the outside, particularly those in academia, I think what we can do to help and that we should focus on is giving a more tangible tangible pathway to say the people of Indonesia have the 17 and 8 demands, and they're very generally spoken. We want A, B, and C, but there's not a direct pathway of how to get there. And there's certain things that have happened in the past in this creeping remilitarization of the country and institutionalization of corruption, where those of us who are in tune with the history of the country can give credence to those demands in a more actionable manner. So for an example, National Law 3 of 2025, back in March, was passed that essentially reformed the old law number 34 of 2004, right? That ended refungee, kind of curtailed military power. And it did a number of things, which included opening up very strategic civilian positions to active duty military officers. It also opened up a number of non-war operations for the military, such as acting as an internal police force, right? And this combined with older laws from 1997 that allows the military to basically have impunity for breaking the law, as they would be investigated by military investigators and through military tribunal. You have very tangible legal methods for this system to come to power creepingly slowly over time. And the people in Indonesia, they clearly have very, in my opinion, reasonable requests, but they lack that direct, like, exactly how do we get to what we want, right?
I have to bring it to a close, but can I just get one more question? Because two people have asked a question about the role of the Labor Party in the context. They were the leaders of the labor demonstration on the 28th. And the question is whether they have any role going forward, since they're clearly not represented in the DPR. Anybody have any thoughts? Final answer?
It's really Linda who should respond to that one. She knows the Labour Party pretty well.
Linda, do they have any hope? Future?
Yeah, I mean, I think the issues of precarity is getting more important now and very, very present in public, and that's kind of opportunity for the Labour Party to take in or to tap into that discussion and debate. And I think it is indeed has a very strong potential, but it's very potential, but it needs to broaden up their support, and that's I think what's Labour Party is doing now, a lot of homework, but they're trying to get younger people, precarity group in the urban area, the ojol and all that. So they are working and they try to be inclusive too, because they are very known to be male dominated and very much into that patriarchal style of old style of union. So I think they are working really hard for that. So I guess for 2029 and also for the local election 2020, 2031, if there are any elections, I'm really scared now.
Okay.
So that's really, I think it's a very strong potential. That's my take on
Okay.
it.
Thank you very much. And thank you to all the wonderful speakers and discussants and people who put questions on the chat here. I hope we have a follow-up on this and we can continue the discussion maybe in a couple of months to see where things have moved since then. But thank you all. Have a good evening, and we'll try to write up the results of this and send it around.